Okay, where to start? This was supposed to be a tutorial on how to make a slip cast latex prosthetic mouth out of an Ultracal 30 mould, but a lot of things went wrong along the way in terms of mould making, which meant that I nearly lost all of the work that I put into it, and which also meant that it wouldn't really work out for being a tutorial. So instead I'm going to present this video, which is kind of showing that everybody makes mistakes, and showing you the mistakes that I made so that you can hopefully learn from them. As with all molds, I started with the sculpt, and you can see the sculpt here in super fast motion. And once that sculpt was finished, I had to remove the upper resin teeth before I molded it. And so the reason that I used clay for the bottom teeth but resin teeth for the upper teeth, well, there's two reasons. One is that it's easier to get that kind of overlap with the resin teeth on top so that they sit like your real teeth do. And then secondly, the reason I use the resin teeth is because they were removable, so that I could get the piece out of the mold without having those teeth in the way, so that I could see the line where the two teeth will connect, and that way I could cut like a slit through the upper and lower teeth, so that when I glued it onto my mouth I would have like an opening that I could use to then talk through and put a straw through to be able to drink water. And yeah, having those teeth be removable meant I had access to that area to cut it, and then I could cut it once I had the latex piece out and then glue those resin teeth back on top, disguising where that cut is. So then I did the normal thing of spraying it with crystal clear spray, and I coated all the exposed plaster with Vaseline, and I used a little bit of water-based clay to smooth out the bottom so there was a flat bottom edge for it. And this is where things started to go wrong, because what I should have done is I should have used more clay to create a flashing. So basically I would have left maybe like 1 centimeter after the sculpt of the plaster, and then built up clay up around the edge of the positive face mold. And what that would have done is when you pour the plaster on top, all around the edges you've got this layer of plastiline clay around the edge, so that then once the two sides have hardened, so you've got your positive, the sculpt, and you've got the mold on top that you've made, that clay layer around the outside enables me to have like a little bit of a gap, and with that gap I can put in a screwdriver, and that screwdriver I can leverage out the positive face cast with the sculpt in it from the negative mold that we've just made. And I just forgot to put a flashing on there, which meant that there's really only two areas where I could kind of leverage out with screwdrivers, which was where that clay was on the bottom at the front. But the rest of the mold, it was just plaster on plaster, and there was no room for me to get a screwdriver in there to get it out. So the other main problem, which I discovered through my friends on Facebook helping me figure out what was wrong, because I was writing a panicked status about I can't open my mold, and a lot of people helped, which is really nice. So my friend Stuart sent me a message, and he looked at the shape of it, and it's basically like a bowl, which means that when I put a screwdriver into it and I'm trying to leverage it out, that screwdriver is going into the positive face cast and putting a lot of pressure on that, and that was causing the face cast to crumble under the pressure, and it was just getting all cracks through it, like nothing was coming out, and then this positive face cast was just crumbling under the screwdriver pressure. And so what I could do to make a better positive mold next time is I could alter the core even more so, because obviously that core's already altered because it's just as part of my face instead of a full face sculpt, and I removed the nose. So what I could do is I could also build up a clay ledge around the outside, which changes the shape of it so that then it can sit in the mold with these two extended areas, and that way when you put a screwdriver in it, the screwdriver pressure is just lifting it straight up out of the mold rather than putting pressure internally onto the positive face cast. And so I will make a new altered core. Also because my core did not make it out of this one, so I need to make a new core anyway, so that would be my next adventure. This video is basically putting the Ultracal 30 on the face positive and putting some burlap in it to strengthen it and letting it dry, and then not being able to open it. Those two things, the shape of the altered core and the shape of the mold, and the lack of flashing, meant that I couldn't really get them open, and meant that my face positive was just crumbling. So I ended up trying to heat up the mold in some hot water to see if that would release the plastiline and help me open it a little bit. And it was still not really moving, so I ended up just getting a hammer and my screwdriver and just hammering it in and making room for it to leverage out, which put a bunch of cracks through the negative. So it doesn't really matter for this one if my positive doesn't make it out because it's a hollow prosthetic. I'm just painting latex into the negative. So as long as the negative makes it through, I can make something out of it, whereas most other forms of molds, so if you're using like silicone, if you're using gelatin, if you're using foam latex, you need the two sides and it's kind of conformed to the face and in between the spaces, whereas this one only needs the negative. So my positive was crumbling, but as long as I could get the negative out, it would be fine. But then that started cracking too. And I eventually, when the cracks happened, it did kind of release a little bit and I could get the positive out. The positive didn't make it out in one piece. It did have a few cracks and a cheek chipped off. So that positive is done. The negative has these cracks in it, but otherwise it's okay. A couple of really thin detail pieces that were too thin to really kind of hold up me getting the clay out. They didn't make it either, but I wasn't sure what that would look like until I ran it to see what the prosthetic piece coming out of it would look like. So managed to only just get the negative out so I could try making a slush latex piece in there. I decided to use a really thin latex, like my balloon rubber latex is the thinnest one that I have, so that I could pour it into the mold and literally slush it around as the name suggests. And I tried to keep it thinnest on the outer edges, so I only kind of went all the way up to the outer edges once, and I let it sit in there for about half an hour and kind of slushed it around a little bit higher up and then a little bit higher up, letting most of it sit in the deepest lip layer for about half an hour until a kind of a gelled skin has formed, because the plaster will absorb the latex's moisture. And then I poured out the excess latex and I left it to dry overnight. I did end up putting a little bit more of a thicker latex, a brush latex, on some areas that I thought needed to be thickened up, but it probably didn't need it, like it would have been fine without that. And then I used a lot of powder to get it out of the mold, and it looked like it had pretty thin edges. It's not like super movable, but I managed to cut a slit through the lip area and it could move up and down. And then I went to glue in the resin teeth, which is where I discovered that all of the gum line in the sculpt was too thin to make it out, and so that was the part that had chipped away. So then the teeth were sitting there, but they were too low, and then this was just gap. So I had to put the teeth up a little bit higher and try and fill the gap with a little bit of latex and tissue. I could have probably also used Bondo, which is like a thickened Prose cream. But it changed the way that the teeth sat on the sculpt. They were kind of bucking out a little bit, which like is annoying, but it's not a huge deal. I did also try to use a technique that I saw Goldie Starling using, which is where you just build up latex on a sculpt without a mold. And I knew in my heart of hearts that I had way too much detail and it wouldn't work, because as you build up more layers, the detail just gets lost, because on that, the details underneath where the sculpt is, and on the surface you just don't see a whole lot. And before I even got it thick enough to stand on its own, there was no detail left. Whereas with the slip latex mold, the detail's on the outside, so you can kind of get a thick piece of the detail on the outside. You just need to make the mold first. So you can see the comparison of those two here. That's what that footage is. So my thoughts on whether it's worth it to do this process. There are pros and cons, like there are with everything. So one of the pros is that the detail is on the outside, and I could get it fairly detailed despite like the really minute details being lost. So to give you a pro or a con, the piece is hollow, which means that it won't weigh very much. So if you wanted to create like a big mask effect, you could do this without it weighing a ton. Unlike if you were to use silicone or gelatin, it would be filled in. So you'd want to use either this hollow latex as like a latex mask or a foam latex appliance, but that requires having the oven and the mixer for it. But that also means that it's not conformed to a face. So I didn't really think about this until I was applying it, but basically with a normal mold you have the face cast that has the conforms of the lips and everything, and then you have the negative and it fills the space in between, so it has a backing which sits perfectly on the actor's face. But this one's hollow, so it doesn't, which means it just kind of floats above and has certain connection points but certain points that don't. So it was a bit harder for me when applying it to work out where the top and bottom lip were supposed to sit on me, and it was a bit harder to then have it be articulated with my mouth because it wasn't perfectly sitting on my lips and moved by that. People can use this ultracal mold and like slip or slush casting latex to do like a full latex mask for Halloween or like whatever it is. Another con is that it doesn't move as well or as realistically as silicone or gelatin. Obviously it's not as flesh-like and it's a bit more rigid, and so I feel like that kind of gives away where the prosthetic is, just because it doesn't really move. A pro is that it's a bit easier for a mold because you only need to open it the one time when you get the sculpt out, otherwise you're just painting inside the mold and removing it each time. Whereas if you have like the two parts of the positive and the negative, like with my gelatin one that you have to put together every time, each time it can create a suction and you can get stressed out that it might not open or that you could crack the mold. So this one doesn't have that after the first time taking it apart. And because it is a mold, it does mean that you can get multiple pieces out of it. So you can do one, take it out, do another one, take it out, and it will come out as perfect replicas each time. And so you can use this multiple times for different cons or for Halloween, for parties, zombie walks, like whatever you're using it for, you can just pull it out of the mold pretty quickly. It is cheap, like one of the cheapest molds you can do because it's Ultra Cal 30 in latex. But obviously the first time that you're doing this, you do need to take all the steps of creating the mold and letting it dry and sculpting and opening it and all of that. So it will take a few days to prepare the first time to create that negative. So it's definitely like a cool technique. I think it's good for beginners, and I think it's especially good for doing larger pieces that need to be hollow and that don't have a whole lot of detail that can get cracked away with the Ultra Cal. Thanks for watching. I'm sorry it wasn't like a proper tutorial of what you should do, but hopefully you learned from my mistakes. I find that mold making is extremely difficult, and learning what not to do is actually really helping me work out how to make better molds. You can watch the application of that piece here, and I've also got the sculpting video up linked here. If you'd like to be updated whenever I do a new video, you can subscribe to my channel here. Alright, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.